Fix what our top engineers couldn't, and I'll marry you on the spot. The words explode across Tech Vanguard's boardroom like a grenade, and every phone in the building starts recording. Celeste Harrington, the company's untouchable CEO, has just turned a critical investor meeting into a public execution, pointing at a black maintenance worker in coveralls and laughing while German investors shift uncomfortably in their seats. 6 weeks of failures. Millions hemorrhaging, a deal on life support. And now, a woman who's never been told no has gambled everything on humiliation going viral. But she doesn't know who she's just challenged. She doesn't know Darius Cole has been watching, learning, solving in silence while her engineers argued in circles. She doesn't know the cameras she ordered to broadcast his failure are about to rewrite her legacy forever. If you want to see power, arrogance, and karma collide in real time, stay with me until the end. And drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. The boardroom on the 14th floor of Tech Vanguard headquarters had floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the Denver skyline like a corporate painting, all glass and steel in altitude. But nobody was looking at the view. Every pair of eyes in the room was locked on the engine mounted on the test stand in the center of the polished conference table. A sleek chrome and carbon prototype, no bigger than a suitcase, surrounded by diagnostic tablets, sensor arrays, and the faint smell of burned electronics. It was supposed to be the future. Right now, it looked like a very expensive paperweight. Celeste Harrington stood at the head of the table with her arms crossed, her tailored navy suit sharp enough to cut glass, her blonde hair pulled back so tight it could have been engineered for aerodynamics. She radiated control the way some people radiated warmth, absolute, calculated, and utterly cold. At 42, she'd built Tech Vanguard from a garage startup into a billion-dollar contender in autonomous transport systems, and she'd done it by being smarter, faster, and more ruthless than everyone who'd ever underestimated her. She did not tolerate failure. And this engine, her engine, the AX-7 hybrid propulsion system that was supposed to revolutionize electric freight transport, had failed 6 times in 6 weeks. Across the table sat 3 representatives from Hoffmann Industrial Group, Germany's third-largest logistics conglomerate, and the company that was supposed to write a check with 8 zeros on it by the end of the week. Klaus Hoffmann himself, silver-haired and skeptical, sat in the center with his arms folded. To his left was his chief engineer, Dr. Marin Alvarez, a woman in her 50s with short gray hair and a reputation for destroying careers with a single technical question. To his right was his CFO, a thin man named Jürgen who hadn't smiled once since he'd stepped off the plane. They'd flown 7,000 miles to see a miracle. What they'd seen instead was a very polite disaster. Again, Celeste said, her voice clipped and precise. She didn't look at anyone in particular, just at the engine, as if she could will it into submission. Run it again. One of her engineers, a pale, exhausted man named Tim Rossfield, glanced nervously at his tablet. Ms. Harrington, the diagnostics are showing the same thermal cascade we've been tracking since— I didn't ask for a diagnosis, Celeste interrupted smoothly. I asked for results. Run it. Tim swallowed and tapped his screen. The engine hummed to life with a low electric whir that built into a deeper combustion-assisted growl. For 10 seconds, it sounded perfect, smooth, controlled, powerful. The sensors lit up green across the board. Tim's shoulders relaxed a fraction. Then, at the 11-second mark, the whir turned into a grinding vibration. The temperature gauge spiked. A warning tone beeped twice, sharp and accusing, and the engine shut itself down. Again. The silence that followed was the kind that made people check their pulse to make sure they were still alive. Klaus Hoffmann leaned back in his chair and said something in German to Dr. Alvarez. She nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. Celeste's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed smooth. That was a calibration issue. We're refining the thermal management protocols in real time. This is cutting-edge technology. There's always an adjustment curve. 6 weeks is not a curve, Dr. Alvarez said quietly, her English flawless and sharp as a scalpel. It's a pattern. Celeste's smile didn't reach her eyes. Then I'm sure you'll appreciate how committed we are to solving it. We appreciate commitment, Klaus said, his accent thick but his meaning clear. But we require function. Our logistics network cannot afford systems that fail under predictable load. If this engine cannot be trusted in a controlled environment, how can we trust it across our entire fleet? You'll trust it, Celeste said, and there was steel in her voice now. Because when we solve this, no one else will come close. We're not chasing the market, Mr. Hoffman. We're defining it. Then define it, Jurgen said flatly. Today. Celeste's assistant, a young woman named Priya, appeared at her shoulder and whispered something. Celeste's expression didn't change, but her eyes flicked toward the door. And that's when Darius Cole walked into the room. He wasn't supposed to be there. Darius was 34, 6'2", with broad shoulders and hands that looked like they'd spent more time holding wrenches than shaking hands. He wore dark blue coveralls with Tech Vanguard facilities stitched across the chest, a tool belt slung low on his hips, and work boots that had seen better days. His skin was deep brown, his hair cut short and clean, and his eyes were the kind of steady that made people either trust him immediately or feel like he could see straight through them. He was carrying a toolbox in one hand and a tablet in the other, and he looked like he'd just walked off the factory floor, which, in fact, he had. Priya had called him up to check a faulty outlet in the boardroom. Routine maintenance, 30-second job, in and out before anyone even noticed. But the outlet was behind Klaus Hoffmann's chair, which meant Darius had to walk past the test stand, past the engineers huddled over their tablets like priests over a dying patient, past Celeste Harrington herself. And that's when she noticed him. She turned, her gaze sweeping over him with the kind of casual dismissal people reserve for furniture or weather. Then her eyes landed on his coveralls, and something shifted in her expression, something sharp and calculating and cruel. "You," she said. Darius stopped. He didn't flinch, didn't freeze, just stopped and looked at her with the calm patience of a man who'd spent years being invisible. "Yes, ma'am?" Celeste's lips curved into a smile that didn't belong anywhere near a functional human face. "What's your name?" "Darius Cole, ma'am. Facilities maintenance." "Facilities," she repeated, as if tasting the word. Then she looked back at Klaus, at Dr. Alvarez, at her engineers, and her smile widened. "Gentlemen, I think we've been overthinking this." Klaus frowned. "Overthinking what?" Celeste gestured toward Darius like a game show host revealing a prize. "We've had our top engineers working on this engine for 6 weeks. Brilliant people, advanced degrees, years of experience, and we're still troubleshooting." She paused, letting the tension build. "So maybe what we need is a fresh perspective, someone who isn't bogged down by assumptions." Tim's face went pale. "Ms. Harrington, I don't think—" "I'm not asking what you think," Celeste said lightly. Then she looked at Darius again, her eyes glittering. "Mr. Cole, you've been standing there for 30 seconds. You've seen the engine. You've heard the problem." She tilted her head. "What do you think is wrong?" The room went silent. Darius looked at her, then at the engine, then back at her. His voice was even, careful. "Ma'am, I'm here to fix an outlet. I'm not an engineer." "No," Celeste agreed, her smile sharpening. "You're not. But I'm curious. Humor me." It wasn't a request. Darius set his toolbox down slowly. He didn't look rattled, just tired, like this was a script he'd read before, and didn't particularly want to perform again. But he stepped closer to the test stand, his eyes moving over the engine, the sensors, the readouts on the tablets. "Can I ask a question?" he said quietly. Celeste's smile widened. "By all means." "What's the engine shutting down at? Time-wise?" Tim blinked. 11 seconds, give or take." Darius nodded slowly. "Every time?" "Every time," Tim confirmed. Darius's eyes moved to the diagnostic tablet. "And the temperature spike. Where's it originating?" "Combustion chamber," one of the other engineers said, a woman named Sandra. "But the cooling system is rated well above the thermal load. It shouldn't be overheating." Darius was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. Not distracted, but focused somewhere no one else was looking. Then he said, "Is the engine built to metric or imperial specs?" Sandra blinked. "Metric. It's a European design partnership." "And the control system?" There was a pause. "Imperial," Tim admitted. "We retrofitted our existing software platform." Darius nodded once, and something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or confirmation. So you've got a metric-built engine with sub-millimeter tolerances running on a control system that's rounding to the nearest 64th of an inch. The room was very, very still. That's not... Sandra started, but then she stopped, her face going blank as the logic clicked into place. Dr. Alvarez leaned forward, her eyes sharp. Go on. Darius glanced at Celeste as if asking permission to continue. She waved a hand lazily, her smile never fading. If the physical hardware is built to one standard and the software's interpreting it through another, Darius said slowly, then every calibration adjustment you make is solving the wrong problem. The engine's not failing because it's broken. It's failing because the two systems are speaking different languages, and at the 11-second mark, the mismatch creates a harmonic feedback loop that the engine reads as a thermal event, so it shuts itself down to protect itself. The silence that followed was the kind that rewrites careers. Klaus Hoffmann's eyebrows went up. Dr. Alvarez's pen hovered over her notepad, frozen mid-word. Sandra's mouth opened, then closed. And Celeste Harrington's smile turned into something else entirely. She laughed. It was a bright, musical sound, utterly devoid of warmth. Well, she said, turning to Klaus with a theatrical flourish, there you have it, gentlemen. Our maintenance worker has solved the problem our engineers couldn't. She looked back at Darius, and her eyes were glacial. Or thinks he has. Darius said nothing. He just stood there, hands loose at his sides, watching her the way you'd watch a rattlesnake that hadn't decided whether to strike yet. Celeste took a step closer. Mr. Cole, I'm going to make you an offer, a public one. She gestured to Priya, who immediately pulled out her phone and started recording. Within seconds, the video was streaming live to Tech Vanguard's internal network. And knowing Celeste's instincts for spectacle, probably to the company's social media channels as well. Everyone's watching now, Celeste said, her voice smooth and poison-sweet. So here's the deal. If you're right, if you can fix this engine that 6 weeks of engineering couldn't solve, I will personally promote you. I'll put you on the engineering team. Hell, I'll give you a corner office. She paused and her smile turned vicious. And I'll marry you, right here, on the spot. Someone in the hallway gasped. Tim looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. But, Celeste continued, if you're wrong, if you waste these investors' time with maintenance worker theories and magic thinking, you're fired, publicly. And I'll make sure every company in this industry knows exactly why. She tilted her head, her expression daring him to refuse. So, do we have a deal, Mr. Cole? Darius looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the engine. Then at Klaus, at Dr. Alvarez, at the cameras recording every breath. And he said, Yes, ma'am. Celeste's grin was triumphant. Excellent. She gestured to the test stand like a queen granting a peasant access to the throne. Then by all means, show us what you've got. Darius picked up his toolbox and walked toward the engine. The first thing Darius did was nothing. He just stood there, staring at the engine like he was listening to it. His hands were still. His breathing was even. He didn't touch a single tool. Problem? Celeste asked sweetly. No, ma'am, Darius said quietly. Just thinking. Try not to hurt yourself, someone muttered from the back of the room. A few nervous laughs followed. Darius didn't react. He crouched down beside the test stand, his eyes moving over the mounting brackets, the sensor placements, the wiring harness. Then he opened his toolbox, not frantically, not performatively, just methodically, and pulled out a small handheld oscilloscope. Sandra frowned. What are you... Checking harmonic frequency, Darius said. He clipped the scope's leads to 2 different points on the engine's chassis and powered it on. The screen lit up with a waveform, jagged, erratic, climbing toward resonance. Dr. Alvarez leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. That shouldn't be there. No, ma'am, Darius agreed. It shouldn't. He moved to his toolbox again and pulled out something that made Tim's eyebrows shoot up. A small, custom-machined piece of metal. Cylindrical, with internal threading and dampening material visible through machined slots. What is that? Klaus asked. Harmonic dampener, Darius said simply. I built it a couple weeks ago. Thought it might help. Celeste's smile faltered. You built it? Yes, ma'am. Why? Darius looked at her, and for the first time there was something in his eyes that wasn't patience. It was quiet, unshakable certainty. Because I've been listening to this engine fail every day for 6 weeks, and I knew what was wrong 3 weeks ago. The room erupted. Then why didn't you? Who authorized? This is completely... Celeste held up a hand and the noise cut off instantly. Her face was unreadable now, all the performative cruelty stripped away, leaving only cold calculation. You're telling me you've known how to fix this for 3 weeks, and you said nothing. I tried, Darius said quietly. I submitted a maintenance report to engineering, twice. Both times, it got kicked back as outside my scope. Tim's face went red. Sandra looked away. Celeste's jaw tightened, but she didn't break. Then prove it. Right now. Darius nodded once. He knelt beside the engine, located the mounting interface between the combustion chamber and the sensor array, and carefully threaded the dampener into place. It took less than 2 minutes. When he stood up, he wiped his hands on his coveralls and said, "Run it." Tim hesitated, his finger hovering over the tablet. "Run it," Celeste repeated, her voice flat. Tim tapped the screen. The engine hummed to life. 10 seconds. 11. 12. The temperature gauge climbed, then leveled. The vibration smoothed. The error code stayed dark. 15 seconds. 20. 30. The engine purred like a promise, and it didn't stop. Klaus Hoffman stood up slowly, his eyes locked on the test stand. Dr. Alvarez's pen was motionless. Jurgen's mouth was open. Celeste Harrington's face had gone absolutely white. The live feed exploded with comments, thousands of them, cascading across the screen faster than anyone could read. Shock, celebration, disbelief. And Darius Cole, standing beside the engine in his coveralls and tool belt, looked like a man who'd just finished a shift. "Anything else, ma'am?" he asked quietly. Celeste didn't answer. She was staring at the engine, at the investors, at the cameras, and for the first time in her life, she had absolutely no idea what to say. Dr. Marin Alvarez was the one who broke the silence. She stood up, walked calmly to the test stand, and looked at the dampener Darius had installed. Then she turned to Klaus and said in flawless German, "This man understands propulsion systems better than anyone in this room." Klaus nodded slowly. Then he looked at Celeste, and his voice was ice. "Miss Harrington, I would like to speak with Mr. Cole, alone." Celeste's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "That's not now," Klaus said, and just like that, the power in the room shifted. Celeste looked at Darius, really looked at him, maybe for the first time, and saw a man who had just rewritten her entire company's trajectory in under 5 minutes. She forced a smile. "Of course. Mr. Cole, please, join us." But Darius didn't move toward the conference room door. He moved toward the outlet he'd been called to fix, knelt down, swapped the faulty unit in 30 seconds flat, packed his tools, and stood up. "I'll be in facilities if you need me," he said, and he walked out of the boardroom like he'd just finished replacing a light bulb. The door closed behind him, and the whole world started talking at once. The hallway outside the boardroom felt like a different planet, quieter, colder, and suddenly far too bright. Darius walked with his toolbox in one hand and his tablet tucked under his arm, his boots making soft, rhythmic sounds against the polished floor. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He could feel the chaos he'd left behind like heat radiating through a closed door. He took the elevator down to the 3rd floor, where facilities kept its offices tucked away in a corner that smelled like floor wax and old coffee. The space was cramped and utilitarian, gray desks, flickering fluorescent lights, a bulletin board covered in safety reminders and shift schedules. His supervisor, a wiry man in his 50s named Gene Holbrook, was sitting at his desk eating a sandwich when Darius walked in. Gene looked up, mid-chew, and his eyes went wide. "You're already back?" "Outlets fixed," Darius said, setting his toolbox down beside his workstation. Gene swallowed hard. "Darius, what the hell just happened up there?" Darius pulled out his phone and saw 17 missed calls, 43 text messages, and a notification that his name was trending on Tech Vanguard's internal network. He turned the screen off and slid the phone back into his pocket. "Fixed an outlet. That's it," That is not it, Gene said, standing up so fast his chair rolled backward. I just got a call from Priya, an executive. She said you fixed the AX7. She said Celeste Harrington tried to humiliate you on a live feed, and you made the damn thing work. Darius didn't answer. He just opened his locker and started putting his tools away, one by one, as methodically as he did everything else. Gene stared at him. You're not even going to say anything? What do you want me to say? I don't know, maybe I just saved a $100 million deal, or I made the CEO look like an idiot in front of German investors? Gene's voice was climbing. Darius, do you understand what you just did? Darius closed his locker and turned to face him. His voice was calm, almost gentle. I installed a part. That's all. That's all? Gene let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. Man, you just walked into the lion's den and pulled a thorn out of its paw. And you think you're going to come back down here and clock out like it's Tuesday? Darius's expression didn't change. It is Tuesday. Gene opened his mouth, closed it, then shook his head slowly. You're either the smartest guy I've ever met or the craziest. Probably both, Darius said quietly. Then he sat down at his desk and pulled up his work tablet, scanning through the afternoon's maintenance requests like nothing had happened. Gene watched him for a long moment, then sighed and sat back down. You know they're not going to let this go, right? Celeste doesn't forget, and she sure as hell doesn't forgive. I know. And you did it anyway. Darius looked up, and for a brief second, something flickered in his eyes. Something that looked like exhaustion, mixed with a kind of weary defiance. Yeah, I did. Gene nodded slowly. Well, for what it's worth, I'm glad you did. Darius didn't answer. He just went back to his tablet, his fingers moving across the screen with the same quiet precision he brought to everything else. But upstairs, in the boardroom, the world was catching fire. No. Celeste Harrington was not a woman who panicked. She had built her career on controlling narratives, managing crises, and turning disasters into opportunities. But as she stood at the head of the table, watching Klaus Hoffmann and Dr. Alvarez murmur to each other in rapid German while Jürgen tapped notes into his tablet, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Uncertainty. The AX-7 was still running, the temperature gauge was stable, the error codes were silent. And the live feed, her weapon, her guarantee that Darius Cole would be humiliated in front of the entire company, had turned into a viral sensation. The comments were still pouring in, thousands of them, and the tone had shifted from mockery to awe to outright celebration. That guy just saved the whole company. CEO got owned by a janitor. This is the best thing I've ever seen. Promote him, marry him. I don't care, just don't let him leave. Celeste's assistant, Priya, stood near the door with her phone in her hand, her face pale. Ms. Harrington, the video's been shared outside the company. It's on LinkedIn, Twitter, Reddit. I can see it, Celeste said sharply. She didn't need a play-by-play. She needed control. And right now, she didn't have it. Klaus stood up, his expression unreadable, and gestured toward the door. Ms. Harrington, a word, privately. It wasn't a request. Celeste forced a smile and nodded. Of course. They stepped into the adjacent conference room, smaller, windowless, designed for difficult conversations. Dr. Alvarez followed, closing the door behind her with a soft click that sounded like a cell door locking. Klaus didn't sit. He didn't smile. He just looked at Celeste with the kind of calm, clinical disappointment that was worse than anger. Explain. Celeste straightened her shoulders. The engine is fixed. The issue was a calibration oversight, exactly the kind of edge case that emerges in cutting-edge development. Mr. Cole identified it and will integrate his solution into the final build. This is a win. A win, Klaus repeated slowly. He glanced at Dr. Alvarez, who was watching Celeste with the focused intensity of a surgeon examining a tumor. Miss Harrington, I have been in this industry for 30 years. I have seen brilliant engineers. I have seen lucky guesses. What I just witnessed was neither. Celeste's smile tightened. I'm not sure I follow. Dr. Alvarez spoke, her voice quiet and precise. That man is not a maintenance worker. Or if he is, it is a profound waste of his abilities. He diagnosed a harmonic resonance issue in under 2 minutes and had a prefabricated solution ready. That is not luck. That is expertise. He's observant, Celeste said smoothly. We value initiative here at Tech Vanguard. You humiliated him, Klaus said flatly. On camera, in front of investors, you turned a technical review into a public spectacle and used a member of your own staff as a prop. He leaned forward and his voice dropped. If that is how you treat the people who solve your problems, Ms. Harrington, I do not want to know how you treat the ones who create them. Celeste's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice level. Mr. Hoffman, I understand your concern, but the reality is that Mr. Cole succeeded. The engine works. The deal is back on track. Everything we promised you is now deliverable. Deliverable by whom? Dr. Alvarez asked. Your engineers, who failed for 6 weeks? Or the man you just threatened to fire on a live broadcast? Celeste didn't answer. Klaus picked up his briefcase and set it on the table with a heavy thud. Here is what will happen. We will extend our visit by 2 days. During that time, I want a full technical review of the AX7 led by Mr. Cole. I want to understand not just what he fixed, but what else he sees. If his insights hold up under scrutiny, we will proceed with the contract, under revised terms. Celeste's eyes sharpened. Revised how? You will promote Mr. Cole immediately, Klaus said. You will put him on the engineering team with full authority, and you will launch an internal review to determine why a man with his skills was buried in maintenance. He paused, and his voice turned cold. If you refuse, we walk, and I will make sure every logistics company in Europe knows why. The room was silent. Celeste's hands were steady, but her mind was racing. She could refuse. She could spin this, reframe it, turn the narrative back in her favor. But Klaus wasn't bluffing. She could see it in his eyes. And if Hoffman Industrial pulled out now, after the video had gone viral, it wouldn't just kill the deal. It would kill the company. She smiled. It was thin and sharp and didn't reach her eyes. Of course. I'll make the arrangements immediately. Klaus nodded once. Good. We will meet with Mr. Cole tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. And Ms. Harrington? He picked up his briefcase and moved toward the door. I suggest you bring your humility. You're going to need it. He walked out. Dr. Alvarez followed, pausing just long enough to give Celeste a look that said more than words ever could. And then Celeste was alone. She stood there for a long moment, her hands flat on the table, her breathing controlled. Then she pulled out her phone and called Tim Rossfield. He answered on the first ring. Ms. Harrington, Find out everything there is to know about Darius Cole, Celeste said quietly. Education, work history, why he's in facilities, everything, and do it quietly. Yes, ma'am. She hung up and stared at the wall, her mind already turning, already calculating. Darius Cole had made her look like a fool in front of the most important investors she'd ever courted. He'd humiliated her on her own stage, with her own cameras, using her own trap. And now she was being forced to promote him. Celeste Harrington did not forgive, but she was very, very good at adapting. By 6 o'clock that evening, Darius's phone had stopped buzzing. The texts had slowed to a trickle. The calls had mostly stopped, except for one number he didn't recognize, which had tried 3 times and left no voicemail. He was in his apartment, a small one-bedroom in a building 20 minutes from Tech Vanguard, eating leftover chili and watching a documentary about deep-sea engineering when someone knocked on his door. He paused the video, set his bowl down, and walked over. Through the peephole, he saw a woman in her late 20s with dark hair pulled into a bun, glasses, and a Tech Vanguard visitor badge clipped to her blazer. He opened the door, but didn't step back. Can I help you? Mr. Cole. Her voice was polite, nervous. My name is Anjali Mehta. I'm with HR. Ms. Harrington asked me to deliver this to you personally. She held out a sealed envelope embossed with the Tech Vanguard logo. Darius took it slowly. What is it? Your promotion paperwork, Anjali said. Effective immediately, you've been reassigned to the engineering department as a senior propulsion specialist. Your salary's been adjusted and you'll report directly to the AX7 project team. She hesitated. There's also a meeting scheduled for tomorrow at 9 with the investors. Darius looked down at the envelope, then back at her. She's serious. Very, Anjali said. Congratulations, Mr. Cole. You've earned it. She smiled, genuinely, warmly, and then she left. Darius closed the door, walked back to the couch, and opened the envelope. Inside was a formal offer letter, a new employee badge, and a handwritten note on Celeste Harrington's personal stationery. It said, "Don't be late." Darius set the note down, picked up his phone, and called Jean. Jean answered on the second ring. "Tell me you got it." "I got it." "And?" Darius was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I don't trust her." "Smart man," Jean said. "But you're going to take it anyway, right?" "Yeah," Darius said quietly. "I am." "Then watch your back," Jean said, "because she's going to be watching you." Darius hung up, stared at the letter for a long time, and then went back to his documentary. But he didn't press play. What? The next morning, Darius arrived at Tech Vanguard at 8:45 wearing dark slacks, a button-down shirt, and the same steady expression he always wore. His new badge got him through security without a second glance. The elevator took him to the 14th floor, and when he stepped into the executive wing, Priya was waiting for him. "Mr. Cole," she said, smiling, "right this way." She led him down the hall to a different conference room, larger, brighter, with a long glass table and chairs that probably cost more than his car. Klaus Hoffmann, Dr. Alvarez, and Jürgen were already seated. Tim, Sandra, and two other engineers Darius didn't recognize sat along the far wall, their tablets open, their expressions somewhere between curious and terrified. And at the head of the table, composed and immaculate in a charcoal suit, sat Celeste Harrington. She looked up when Darius entered, and her smile was warm and professional and utterly unreadable. "Mr. Cole, thank you for joining us. Please sit." Darius sat. Klaus folded his hands on the table. "Mr. Cole, I'll be direct. Yesterday you identified and solved a problem my engineers and Ms. Harrington's engineers could not. Today, I want to understand why." Darius met his gaze. "I listened." Dr. Alvarez tilted her head. "Elaborate." "The engine was telling everyone what was wrong," Darius said quietly. "The shutdown timing, the thermal signature, the vibration pattern, it was all consistent. But everyone was looking at the software or the materials or the thermals in isolation. Nobody was asking if the problem was in how the systems were talking to each other." "And you were," Dr. Alvarez said. "I was," Darius confirmed. "I don't have a PhD. I don't have the kind of clearance that gets me into design meetings. But I have time. And I have ears, so I listened." Klaus leaned back. "Where did you study engineering?" "Community College in Detroit," Darius said. "Then 2 years at Wayne State before I had to drop out. Financial reasons." "And your work experience?" "Auto plants, HVAC systems, industrial maintenance, anywhere that needed someone who could fix things and didn't ask too many questions about degrees." Dr. Alvarez's eyes narrowed. "You're overqualified for maintenance." "Yes, ma'am," Darius said simply. "I am." Celeste's smile didn't waver, but her eyes were ice. "Then why apply here for a facilities position?" Darius looked at her, and for just a second something passed between them, an acknowledgement, maybe, or a challenge. "Because I needed a job, and you were hiring." The room was silent. Then Klaus said, "Show me the dampener." Darius pulled a small case from his bag and set it on the table. Inside were 3 identical units, the one he'd installed yesterday, and 2 spares. He handed one to Dr. Alvarez. She examined it closely, turning it over in her hands. "This is precision work." "I have a small shop," Darius said. "Lathe, mill, basic tools." "You machined this yourself?" "Yes, ma'am." Dr. Alvarez looked at Klaus, and something unspoken passed between them. Then she set the dampener down and said, "Mr. Cole, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to answer honestly. Do you believe this engine is ready for production?" Darius didn't hesitate. "No." Every engineer in the room froze. Celeste's smile vanished. "Excuse me?" Darius kept his eyes on Dr. Alvarez. The dampener fixes the harmonic issue, but the root problem is still there. You've got two systems that were never designed to work together. The dampener is a patch, a good one, but still a patch. If you want this engine to be reliable at scale, you need to either rebuild the control system in metric or re-engineer the hardware in imperial. Anything less is just buying time. The silence that followed was deafening. Tim looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Sandra's face had gone pale, and Celeste's eyes were locked on Darius with the kind of focus that could burn holes through steel. But Klaus was smiling. "Finally," he said, "someone tells the truth." He looked at Celeste. "Ms. Harrington, this is the man I want leading your next phase of development, not as a consultant, not as an advisor, as your lead engineer." Celeste's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed smooth. "Mr. Hoffman, I appreciate your confidence, but—" "No buts," Klaus said. "You promised me a functional engine. Mr. Cole gave me one. You promised me innovation. Mr. Cole gave me that too. Now I'm telling you what I need: honesty, competence, and leadership. And right now, he's the only one in this room who's demonstrated all three." Dr. Alvarez nodded. "I concur." Jurgen made a note on his tablet without looking up. Celeste's hands were flat on the table, her knuckles white. But when she spoke, her voice was perfectly controlled. "Then we'll make it happen. Mr. Cole, welcome to the leadership team." Darius looked at her, then at Klaus, then back at her. "I'll need full access to the design files, and I'll need to bring in my own team." "Done," Klaus said. "Not done," Celeste said, her smile returning like a knife sliding back into its sheath. "Mr. Cole, you'll have access. You'll have resources, but you'll also have oversight. This is still my company, and I don't hand over the keys without conditions." "What conditions?" Darius asked quietly. Celeste leaned forward. "You deliver a production-ready engine in 8 weeks. Full integration, full testing, full certification. If you succeed, you stay. If you fail, you're gone, and so is this deal." She glanced at Klaus. "I assume that's acceptable?" Klaus's smile was thin. "If Mr. Cole agrees." Every eye in the room turned to Darius. He sat there for a moment, his hands folded, his expression unreadable. Then he said, 8 weeks. 8 weeks, Celeste confirmed. Darius stood up, picked up his case, and looked at her one last time. "Then I'd better get started." And he walked out of the room, leaving Celeste Harrington sitting at the head of her own table, smiling a smile that didn't reach her eyes, wondering how a man in coveralls had just taken control of her entire company. Darius's first act as lead engineer was to requisition a workspace that didn't exist yet. He didn't ask Celeste. He didn't go through channels. He walked straight to facilities, his old department, and told Gene Holbrook he needed the storage room on the second floor cleared out by end of day. Gene stared at him. "The one full of old server racks and furniture nobody wants to move? That's the one." "Darius, that room hasn't been touched in 3 years. It's a fire hazard wrapped in dust." "Then it's perfect," Darius said. "I need space where people won't bother me, and I need it today." Gene shook his head slowly, but he was grinning. "Man, you really don't care about making friends, do you?" "I care about making engines work," Darius said. "Friends are optional." By 4 o'clock, the storage room was empty. By 5, Darius had moved in 3 workbenches, 2 monitors, a whiteboard that stretched the length of the wall, and enough tools to rebuild a car from scratch. By 6, he'd pulled the complete AX7 design files onto his system and started running simulations. He didn't leave until 2 in the morning. He was back at 7. The second day, he sent an email to every engineer who'd worked on the AX7 project, 23 people in total, with a single line in the subject field. "If you want to fix this right, meet me in 2B at noon." 11 people showed up. Tim Rossfield was one of them, looking nervous and exhausted. Sandra Okoye came in with a coffee in each hand and suspicion in her eyes. A quiet software engineer named Raj Patel sat in the back with his laptop open, watching Darius like he was trying to solve a puzzle. The others were a mix of junior engineers, technicians, and one older man named Ed Carver, who'd been with Tech Vanguard since the company was founded and had seen 3 CEOs come and go. Darius stood at the front of the room beside the whiteboard, which was already covered in schematics, notes, and diagrams that looked like they belonged in a textbook. He didn't waste time with introductions. The AX-7 fails because it's two engines pretending to be one, he said. The hardware is metric, the software is imperial. The dampener I installed buys us time, but it's not a solution. It's a band-aid. If we're going to deliver a production-ready system in 8 weeks, we need to rebuild the control architecture from the ground up. Sandra's eyes narrowed. You're talking about rewriting the entire software stack. I'm talking about making the software and hardware speak the same language, Darius said. Right now, every calibration adjustment we make is compensating for a translation error. We're not fixing the engine, we're teaching it to limp. Ed Carver leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. That's a 16-week job, minimum. Not if we work smart, Darius said. He turned to the whiteboard and tapped a section of the diagram. We don't need to rebuild everything. We need to isolate the critical pathways, combustion timing, thermal management, torque distribution, and standardize those first. Everything else can be adjusted iteratively. Raj spoke up from the back, his voice quiet but sharp. You're proposing a modular rewrite. Exactly, Darius said. We fix the foundation, then layer the rest on top. It's faster, cleaner, and it gives us room to test as we go. Tim shook his head. Celeste will never approve this. She wants the engine on the road, not back in development. Celeste wants a deal that doesn't fall apart the first time a truck hits a hill in winter, Darius said flatly. And Klaus Hoffman wants an engine he can trust. We give them both, or we give them nothing. The room was silent. Sandra set her coffee down and crossed her arms. You know she's going to fight you on this. I know. And you're doing it anyway. Darius looked at her and his voice was steady. I didn't come here to make Celeste happy. I came here to make this engine work. Ed Carver let out a low whistle. Well, you've got guts, I'll give you that. He stood up, grabbed a marker, and walked to the whiteboard. All right, show me the pathways. And just like that, the work began. Over the next 2 weeks, Darius's team, because that's what it had become, whether Celeste acknowledged it or not, tore the AX-7 apart and rebuilt it piece by piece. They worked 14-hour days, surviving on vending machine food and the kind of caffeine-fueled focus that only comes from knowing you're running out of time. Darius was there before anyone else arrived and stayed long after they left, his hands moving over schematics, his mind turning problems into solutions with a speed that made even the veterans nervous. He didn't manage like Celeste. He didn't demand. He didn't manipulate. He just worked, and he expected everyone else to do the same. If you had a question, he answered it. If you had an idea, he listened. If you screwed up, he didn't yell. He just showed you how to fix it and moved on. People started volunteering for his team. By the end of the first week, his crew had grown to 18. By the end of the second, it was 27, and Jean Holbrook had to requisition 2 more rooms just to hold everyone. And Celeste Harrington noticed. She noticed the emails. She noticed the shift schedules. She noticed the way people talked about Darius in the break rooms and hallways, not with the polite deference they gave her, but with something closer to respect or loyalty. She didn't like it. On the 16th day, she called Darius to her office. He arrived at 3 o'clock, still wearing his work clothes, jeans, a Tech Vanguard polo, and boots that had seen better days. Celeste was behind her desk, framed by the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked downtown Denver, her hands folded, her expression calm and unreadable. Sit, she said. Darius sat. Celeste studied him for a moment, the way a chess player studies the board before making a move. You've been busy. Yes, ma'am. You've pulled nearly 30 people onto your project. That's a third of my engineering department. They volunteered. I'm aware, Celeste said. Her voice was smooth, controlled, but there was an edge underneath. I'm also aware that you've been making decisions without consulting me, ordering materials, reallocating resources, running your own little empire on the second floor. Darius met her gaze. You told me to deliver a production-ready engine in 8 weeks. I'm delivering. You're also undermining my authority. No, ma'am, Darius said quietly. I'm doing my job. Celeste leaned forward and her smile was sharp. Let me be very clear, Mr. Cole. I gave you this opportunity because Klaus Hoffman insisted, but you work for me. Not him, not your team, me. And if you think I'm going to let you build your own kingdom inside my company, you are badly mistaken. Darius didn't flinch. I don't want a kingdom. I want the engine to work. Then keep me informed, Celeste said, her voice dropping to something colder. Every decision, every change, every move, or the next time you walk into my office, it'll be to clean out your desk. She held his gaze, waiting for him to back down, to apologize, to show some sign that she still had control. But Darius just stood up, nodded once, and said, "Understood," and he walked out. Celeste sat there for a long time after he left, staring at the door, her jaw tight. Then she picked up her phone and made a call. "Tim," she said when he answered, "I need you to start documenting everything Darius Cole does, every meeting, every email, every conversation. I want a paper trail." There was a pause. "Ms. Harrington, I'm not sure that's—" "I didn't ask if you were sure," Celeste said. "I told you what I need. Make it happen." She hung up, leaned back in her chair, and looked out at the city below. Darius Cole had saved her company, and now he was threatening to take it from her. She wasn't going to let that happen. Yeah. 3 days later, Dr. Marin Alvarez returned to Tech Vanguard unannounced. She walked past reception without signing in, took the elevator to the second floor, and found Darius in his workspace surrounded by engineers, test rigs, and enough technical documentation to fill a library. She knocked on the open door. Darius looked up, saw her, and straightened. "Dr. Alvarez." "Mr. Cole," she said. "Do you have a moment?" He glanced at his team, then nodded. "Take 10, he said. "We'll pick this up when I get back." They filed out, leaving Darius and Dr. Alvarez alone. She walked to the whiteboard, studied the diagrams, and nodded slowly. "Modular integration. Smart." She turned to face him. "How's it going?" "We're on schedule," Darius said. "The control system's nearly finished. We'll start full integration testing next week." "And Ms. Harrington?" Darius's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "She's aware of the progress." Dr. Alvarez smiled faintly. "That's a diplomatic answer." She pulled out a chair and sat down, gesturing for Darius to do the same. "I'm going to tell you something, Mr. Cole, and I want you to listen carefully. I've been in this industry for 30 years. I've seen brilliant engineers destroyed by mediocre executives who felt threatened. And I've seen good companies collapse because the people at the top cared more about control than results." Darius sat slowly. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Celeste Harrington is afraid of you," Dr. Alvarez said bluntly. "And when people like her get afraid, they get dangerous. You humiliated her, you took her spotlight, and now you're proving day after day that she made a mistake keeping you in maintenance." She leaned forward. "She's not going to let that stand. I'm just doing my job." "No," Dr. Alvarez said. "You're doing her job, better than she ever did. And she knows it." She paused. "Klaus and I have been talking. If this engine works, and I believe it will, we want you on the European side of the partnership, leading the production integration. It's a 2-year contract, competitive salary, full authority." Darius stared at her. "You're offering me a job." "I'm offering you an escape route," Dr. Alvarez said. "Because once this deal closes, Celeste is going to find a way to get rid of you. I've seen it before. She'll wait until the spotlight's off, until the investors are gone, and then she'll bury you in paperwork, reassignments, or manufactured failures until you quit or she has an excuse to fire you." She stood up. "You don't have to decide now, but think about it, because the clock's ticking, Mr. Cole, and not just on the engine." She walked to the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, I hope you stay. This company needs someone like you, but don't let loyalty to a place that never valued you become the thing that destroys you." And then she was gone. Darius sat there alone, staring at the whiteboard, her words echoing in his head. He didn't move for a long time. The test was scheduled for day 43, 3 weeks ahead of Celeste's deadline, but Darius didn't believe in waiting when the work was done. The AX-7 had been fully rebuilt, recalibrated, and integrated with the new control system. Every pathway had been tested, every simulation had run clean, and now it was time to see if the engine could do what everyone said it couldn't: run flawlessly under real-world conditions for a sustained duration. They set up the test in Tech Vanguard's outdoor vehicle bay, where a full-size autonomous truck sat waiting, its cargo bed loaded with ballast to simulate a real freight load. The AX-7 was mounted in the engine compartment, wired into every diagnostic system the company owned. Klaus Hoffmann, Dr. Alvarez, and Jürgen flew back in for the demonstration. Celeste stood near the truck with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. And Darius's team surrounded the vehicle like a pit crew, their faces tight with anticipation and exhaustion. The plan was simple. Run the truck through a 50-mile circuit on Tech Vanguard's private test track. Urban simulation, highway speeds, steep grades, emergency braking, the full gauntlet. If the engine performed without air, the deal was done. If it failed, everything fell apart. Darius stood beside the truck with a tablet in his hand, running final checks. Tim was beside him, pale but focused. Sandra was monitoring thermal sensors. Raj was at the control station with 3 monitors showing real-time data feeds. Klaus approached, his hands in his coat pockets. "Nervous, Mr. Cole?" Darius glanced at him. "No, sir." "Confident?" "The math works," Darius said. "The engine's ready." Klaus smiled faintly. "Good, because a lot of people are watching." He wasn't exaggerating. Celeste had arranged for the test to be live-streamed again. This time, though, the cameras weren't pointed at Darius to humiliate him. They were pointed at the truck to document his success, or his failure. Celeste walked over, her heels clicking against the pavement. "Are we ready, Mr. Cole?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then let's not waste time," she said. She looked at the cameras, smiled, and raised her voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, today Tech Vanguard proves that innovation isn't about throwing money at a problem. It's about finding the right people to solve it. Mr. Cole, if you would." Darius nodded once, tapped his tablet, and said into his radio, "Raj, start the sequence." The truck's systems came online with a low hum. The AX-7 engaged, its hybrid heart beating smooth and strong. The dashboard lit up green across the board. And then the truck rolled forward. It accelerated smoothly onto the test track, the engine purring like it had been born to do this. The telemetry feeds showed perfect combustion ratios, stable temperatures, flawless torque distribution. The truck hit 40 miles per hour, 50, 60. No errors, no warnings, no shutdowns. The crew started breathing again. The truck completed the first lap. Urban simulation, stop and start traffic patterns, tight turns. Clean. The second lap was highway speeds, sustained acceleration, high load conditions. Still clean. The third lap was the killer. Steep grades, simulated mountain passes, stress conditions designed to break engines that weren't ready. The AX-7 climbed without hesitation. Temperatures rose but stayed within tolerance. Power delivery stayed smooth. The autonomous systems handled every shift, every adjustment, every demand with mechanical grace. And when the truck crossed the finish line 50 miles later, the engine was still running perfectly. The crew erupted in cheers. Sandra hugged Tim. Raj threw his headset in the air. Ed Carver let out a whoop that echoed across the bay. Klaus Hoffmann was smiling. Dr. Alvarez was taking notes. And Celeste Harrington was staring at Darius Cole with an expression that could have frozen fire. Because he'd done it. He'd delivered a miracle in 6 weeks instead of 8, and he'd done it without needing her at all. Klaus walked over to Darius and extended his hand. "Exceptional work, Mr. Cole. Truly exceptional." Darius shook it. "Thank you, sir." Dr. Alvarez joined them, her eyes bright. "I want a full technical breakdown, every modification, every decision point. This is going into our training materials." "I'll send it over," Darius said. Klaus turned to Celeste, and his voice was formal but warm. "Ms. Harrington, you have your deal. We'll finalize the contracts by end of week." He paused. "And I'll expect Mr. Cole to be part of the ongoing partnership. His expertise is invaluable." Celeste's smile was radiant and completely empty. Of course. We wouldn't dream of proceeding without him. But her eyes said something else entirely. The cameras were still rolling. The comments were flooding in, thousands of them, celebrating Darius, praising the team, marveling at the turnaround. Tech Vanguard stock had already jumped 4 points. The deal was saved, the company was saved, and Celeste Harrington had just been forced to watch a man she'd tried to humiliate become the hero of her own story. She walked over to Darius, her smile never faltering, and extended her hand. "Congratulations, Mr. Cole. You've exceeded every expectation. Darius shook her hand. Her grip was firm, controlled, and cold. Thank you, ma'am, he said. She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping so only he could hear. Enjoy this moment, because it's the last one you'll have on my terms. Then she pulled back, smiled for the cameras, and walked away. And Darius stood there, surrounded by his team, watching her go, knowing that the real fight was just beginning. The celebration lasted exactly one night. By the next morning, Celeste Harrington had already begun dismantling what Darius had built. It started subtly. An email went out to all department heads announcing a comprehensive restructuring of project management protocols, effective immediately. New approval chains, new documentation requirements, new oversight committees that reported directly to Celeste's office. On the surface, it looked like standard corporate optimization, tightening procedures, improving accountability, ensuring quality control. But everyone who'd worked with Darius knew exactly what it was. It was a cage. Tim Rossfield saw it first. He came to Darius's workspace at 7 in the morning, his face pale, holding a printed copy of the new protocols. Have you seen this? Darius was at his workbench reviewing integration specs for the European production rollout. He glanced up. Seen what? Tim dropped the document on the table. Every decision you make now requires sign-off from 3 separate departments. Every prototype requires a formal review board. Every test needs advance approval from Celeste's office with a 72-hour notice period. He paused. Darius, she's shutting you down. Darius picked up the document and read through it slowly, his expression unchanging. When he finished, he set it down and said, "Then we follow the protocols." Tim stared at him. "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious," Darius said. "She wants documentation? We'll document everything. She wants approvals? We'll get approvals. She wants oversight? We'll give her so much oversight she'll drown in paperwork. That'll slow us down by weeks." "Then we work faster," Darius said quietly. He looked at Tim, and his voice was steady. "She's testing me, waiting for me to push back so she can say I'm insubordinate, uncooperative, a liability, but I'm not going to give her that." He tapped the document. "We're going to follow every single rule, perfectly, and we're going to deliver anyway." Tim shook his head slowly. "You know she's going to keep tightening the screws until you break, right?" "I know," Darius said, "but I'm not going to break." He went back to his specs, and Tim stood there for a moment longer, then walked out without another word. Over the next 2 weeks, Darius's team learned to navigate a bureaucratic maze that seemed to grow more complex every day. Simple requisitions that used to take an hour now took 3 days. Design changes that used to require a quick email now required formal proposals reviewed by committees that met twice a week. Test schedules that used to be flexible now had to be booked a week in advance and could only run during approved windows. And through it all, Darius stayed calm. He filled out every form. He attended every meeting. He answered every question with the same patient precision he brought to engineering problems. He never complained. He never pushed back. He just kept working, kept solving, kept moving forward. It was driving Celeste insane. She'd designed the system to frustrate him, to slow him down, to make him lose his temper so she could justify removing him. But Darius Cole didn't lose his temper. He adapted, and worse, his team adapted with him. They turned the bureaucracy into a game, finding creative ways to expedite approvals, stack meetings efficiently, and pre-document decisions so thoroughly that review boards had nothing left to question. By the end of week 2, Darius's team was hitting every deadline despite the new protocols. By the end of week 3, they were actually ahead of schedule, and Celeste's frustration was starting to show. She called him to her office again on day 58. This time, she didn't wait for him to sit. "You think you're clever," she said the moment he walked in. Darius stopped in the doorway. "Ma'am?" "The protocols," Celeste said, her voice tight. "You're using them against me, burying my staff in paperwork, forcing approvals so fast they don't have time to review properly." "I'm following the procedures you established," Darius said evenly. "If there's a problem with how they're being implemented, I'm happy to adjust." "Don't play games with me," Celeste snapped. "You know exactly what you're doing." Darius met her gaze. "I'm doing my job. The European rollout starts in 4 weeks. Klaus Hoffmann expects a seamless transition. I'm making sure we deliver." Celeste's jaw tightened. "You're making sure you look indispensable." I'm making sure the company succeeds, Darius said quietly. If that makes me indispensable, that's not my problem. It's yours. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Celeste's eyes were ice. Get out! Darius turned and left without another word. But as he walked back to his workspace, he felt the weight of what was coming. Dr. Alvarez had been right. Celeste wasn't going to let this go. She was going to keep pushing until something broke. He just had to make sure it wasn't him. The breaking point came 3 days later, in the middle of a routine inspection that wasn't routine at all. Darius was in the vehicle bay overseeing final diagnostics on the production prototypes, 3 AX-7 units destined for Hoffmann Industrial's pilot program in Germany. His team was running through the checklist when Celeste arrived with 2 members of Tech Vanguard's Quality Assurance Department and a man in a suit Darius didn't recognize. Celeste's smile was professional and cold. Mr. Cole, I hope we're not interrupting. Darius straightened. Not at all. What can I do for you? This is Marcus Webb from our Legal Compliance Division, Celeste said, gesturing to the man in the suit. He's here to conduct a formal review of the AX-7 production units before they're cleared for international shipment. Darius glanced at Marcus, then back at Celeste. We've already completed QA. Everything's documented. I'm aware, Celeste said smoothly. But given the scope of this contract and the reputational risk involved, I've decided we need an additional layer of verification. I'm sure you understand. Darius understood perfectly. This wasn't about quality assurance. This was about finding something, anything, that could justify delaying the rollout or undermining his credibility. Of course, Darius said. We're happy to cooperate. Marcus Webb stepped forward, pulling out a tablet. I'll need access to all design files, testing logs, material certifications, and personnel records for everyone who worked on these units. That's already compiled, Darius said. He gestured to Sandra, who handed over a data drive. Everything's there, cross-referenced and indexed. Marcus took the drive without comment and plugged it into his tablet. He started scrolling through files while Celeste watched Darius with the focus of a hawk studying prey. For 20 minutes, Marcus reviewed documentation, cross-checked specifications, and examined the engines themselves. Darius's team stood by silently, their faces tense. Tim was chewing his thumbnail. Sandra's arms were crossed so tight her knuckles were white. Finally, Marcus looked up. The documentation is thorough. I don't see any compliance issues. Celeste's smile tightened. Check the thermal certification on Unit 2. I want to verify the stress test parameters. Marcus frowned but pulled up the file. He read through it, compared it to the spec sheet, and shook his head. It's within tolerance, no issues. What about the torque calibration on Unit 3? Also compliant. Celeste's frustration was starting to show, just barely. A tightness around her eyes, a sharpness in her voice. I want a full manual inspection. Every component, every connection. Marcus hesitated. Ms. Harrington, that's a 16-hour process. The units are scheduled to ship tomorrow. Then we'll delay the shipment, Celeste said. I'm not sending anything overseas until I'm satisfied it meets our standards. Darius's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. Ms. Harrington, Klaus Hoffmann is expecting these units on Friday. If we delay, we miss the production window. That sets the entire European rollout back by 3 weeks. Then you should have made sure everything was perfect the first time, Celeste said, her smile returning. We'll reschedule. And that's when Dr. Marin Alvarez's voice cut through the room like a blade. No, you won't. Everyone turned. Dr. Alvarez was standing in the entrance to the vehicle bay with Klaus Hoffmann beside her, both of them wearing expressions that could have stopped traffic. Klaus stepped forward, his eyes locked on Celeste. Ms. Harrington, explain. Celeste's composure didn't crack, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Surprise, maybe, or calculation. Mr. Hoffmann, I wasn't expecting you until tomorrow. Clearly, Klaus said. His voice was measured, but there was steel underneath. Why are you delaying our shipment? I'm ensuring quality, Celeste said smoothly. It's my responsibility as CEO to guarantee that everything leaving this facility meets our standards. The units have already been certified, Dr. Alvarez said flatly. I reviewed the documentation myself this morning. Every specification is met. Every test passed. There is no legitimate reason to delay. I have concerns, Celeste began. You have control issues, Klaus interrupted, and the room went silent. I've been watching you, Ms. Harrington, the new protocols, the approval chains, the sudden audits. You are not protecting quality. You are sabotaging Mr. Cole because he made you look incompetent. Celeste's face went very still. That's not... It is exactly what you are doing, Klaus said, his accent thickening with anger. And I am done pretending otherwise. He turned to Marcus Webb. Are these units compliant? Marcus glanced at Celeste, then back at Klaus. Yes, sir. Fully compliant. Then clear them for shipment, Klaus said. He looked at Celeste, and his voice dropped to something colder than Darius had ever heard. Immediately. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Celeste said, her voice tight, Of course. Clear them. Marcus nodded and made a note on his tablet. Klaus turned to Darius. Mr. Cole, I need to speak with you, privately. Darius followed Klaus and Dr. Alvarez to a small conference room off the main bay. When the door closed, Klaus didn't waste time. This cannot continue, he said. Celeste Harrington is a liability. She is putting her ego ahead of this partnership, and I will not tolerate it. He paused. We are prepared to make you an offer, formal employment with Hoffman Industrial. You will lead the European integration team, report directly to Dr. Alvarez, and have full autonomy. Starting salary is 200,000 euros, with performance incentives and relocation support. Darius stood very still. That's generous. It is fair, Klaus said. You have earned it. But more than that, we need you, not just for this engine, but for everything that comes next. He leaned forward. You do not belong here, Mr. Cole. You belong with people who value what you can do. Dr. Alvarez spoke quietly. He's right, and you know he is. Darius looked at them both, and for the first time since this whole thing started, he felt something crack inside him. Not doubt, but exhaustion. The weight of fighting every day, of proving himself over and over, of being invisible until he was suddenly too visible. Can I think about it? He asked. Of course, Klaus said, but not for long. We leave tomorrow. The offer expires when we do. Darius nodded. Understood. He walked back to the bay where his team was still standing by the engines, their faces tight with tension. Tim met his eyes, questioning. Sandra looked ready to punch something. Ed Carver just shook his head slowly. Darius didn't say anything. He just went back to work. But that night, lying in his apartment staring at the ceiling, he couldn't stop thinking about Klaus's offer. About leaving. About starting over somewhere that didn't treat him like a problem to be managed. About what it would mean to walk away from the people who'd fought beside him. He pulled out his phone and called Jean Holbrook. Jean answered on the second ring. You okay? No, Darius said quietly. I don't think I am. Jean was silent for a moment. What happened? Darius told him. All of it. The protocols, the inspections, the offer from Hoffman Industrial. When he finished, Jean let out a long breath. Man, that's a hell of a choice. I know. What are you going to do? Darius closed his eyes. I don't know. Do you want my advice? Yeah. Jean's voice was steady, the kind of calm that came from years of watching people make hard decisions. You've already won, Darius. You proved yourself. You saved the company. You built something real. Nobody can take that from you. He paused. But if staying here means fighting Celeste Harrington every single day for the rest of your career, that's not winning. That's surviving. And you deserve better than that. Darius didn't answer for a long time. Then he said, Thanks, Jean. Anytime, brother. Anytime. Darius hung up and stared at his phone, Klaus's offer still echoing in his head. He had until tomorrow to decide. And he had no idea what he was going to say. The next morning, Darius arrived at Tech Vanguard at 6:30 and went straight to the vehicle bay. The production units were being loaded onto a freight truck bound for the airport. His team was there supervising, making sure every connection was secure, every diagnostic was green. Sandra saw him first. Morning. Morning, Darius said. He watched the crew work for a moment, then said quietly, I need to tell you something. Sandra's eyes sharpened. What? Hoffman Industrial offered me a job, leading the European integration team. They want an answer today. Sandra went very still. Then she said, Are you taking it? I don't know. Tim walked over, overhearing. You should take it. Darius looked at him. What? You should take it, Tim repeated. Celeste's never going to stop. She's going to make your life hell until you quit or she finds a way to force you out. And we all know it. He glanced at Sandra, then back at Darius. You've done everything you can here. You've earned the right to work somewhere that actually appreciates you. Sandra nodded slowly. He's right. As much as I hate to say it. Darius shook his head. I'm not leaving you all behind. You're not leaving us behind, Sandra said firmly. You're showing us what's possible. And maybe, just maybe, if you leave, the board will finally realize what they're losing and do something about Celeste. Ed Carver walked over, his arms crossed. Kid, I've been in this business for 30 years. I've seen a lot of talented people get crushed by executives who couldn't handle being outshined. Don't let that be you. Darius looked at them. His team, the people who'd trusted him, worked with him, fought beside him, and he saw in their faces not resentment or abandonment, but something else. Permission. You're sure? He asked quietly. We're sure, Sandra said. Go build something great. And when you do, remember where you came from. Darius nodded slowly. Then he pulled out his phone and sent a single text to Dr. Alvarez. I accept. 3 minutes later, his phone rang. It was Klaus. Mr. Cole, Klaus said, and Darius could hear the smile in his voice. Welcome to Hoffman Industrial. Thank you, sir. We'll have the contracts ready by noon. Can you meet us at our hotel? I'll be there, Darius said. He hung up, took a breath, and looked at his team one more time. Thank you for everything. Tim grinned. Go kick some ass in Europe. Sandra saluted. Don't forget us when you're running the whole damn company. Ed Carver just nodded. You did good, kid. Real good. And Darius walked out of the vehicle bay for the last time, feeling lighter than he had in months. But he had one more stop to make before he left. He took the elevator to the 14th floor, walked past Priya's desk without stopping, and knocked on Celeste Harrington's door. Come in, she called. Darius opened the door and stepped inside. Celeste looked up from her desk, her expression shifting from surprise to cold calculation in less than a second. Mr. Cole, I wasn't expecting you. I'm resigning, Darius said simply. Effective immediately. I've accepted a position with Hoffman Industrial. Celeste's face went very, very still. I see, she said slowly. And you thought you'd inform me personally. How considerate. I thought you'd want to know, Darius said. His voice was calm, even. I've left all project documentation with my team. The European rollout is on schedule. There won't be any disruption. Celeste stood up, her hands flat on the desk. You're making a mistake. No, ma'am, Darius said quietly. I'm making a choice, and it's the right one. He turned to leave, but Celeste's voice stopped him. You think you've won, she said, and there was something raw in her voice now, something that sounded almost like disbelief. You think walking away makes you the hero of this story. Darius looked back at her, and for the first time he smiled. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't triumphant. It was just tired, and maybe a little sad. I don't need to be the hero, he said. I just needed to do the work. And he walked out, leaving Celeste Harrington standing alone in her office, staring at the door he'd just closed. The news spread through Tech Vanguard like wildfire in dry grass. By noon, everyone knew Darius Cole had resigned. By 2 o'clock, the rumors had already spiraled into mythology. He'd been poached by the Germans, he'd demanded an impossible salary, he'd threatened to walk unless Celeste stepped down. None of it was true. But the truth didn't matter as much as the symbolism. The man who'd saved the company was leaving, and everyone knew exactly why. The official press release went out at 3:15, carefully worded and clinically neutral. Tech Vanguard is pleased to announce that Darius Cole, Senior Propulsion Specialist, will be transitioning to a leadership role with our strategic partner, Hoffman Industrial Group. We wish him continued success and look forward to our ongoing collaboration. It was signed by Celeste Harrington, and it said absolutely nothing about what had really happened. But the Tech Vanguard employees knew, and the internet knew, because the live stream of Darius fixing the engine, the one Celeste had ordered to humiliate him, was still circulating, still being shared, still being dissected by engineering forums and business podcasts and social media threads that wouldn't die. The story had taken on a life of its own, and Celeste's carefully crafted narrative about innovation and teamwork was being drowned out by a simpler, more powerful truth. She'd tried to destroy a black maintenance worker on camera, and he'd made her look like a fool. By the time Darius signed his contracts at the Hoffman Industrial Hotel suite that evening, Tech Vanguard's stock had dropped 3 points, and the company's internal message boards were in open revolt. Klaus Hoffman handed Darius a pen, his expression warm. "Welcome to the team, Mr. Cole. I think this is the beginning of something very important." Darius signed his name on the final page, and Dr. Alvarez witnessed it with a satisfied nod. "We'll start the visa process immediately. You'll be in Stuttgart by the end of the month. We've already arranged temporary housing and a relocation stipend." "I appreciate that," Darius said quietly. He looked at the contract, the salary, the benefits, the authority he'd never had at Tech Vanguard, and felt something he hadn't felt in years, not relief, not triumph, just possibility. "There's one more thing," Klaus said. He pulled out another document, this one thinner, and slid it across the table. "A signing bonus, 50,000 euros. Consider it a thank you for everything you've already accomplished." Darius stared at the number. It was more than he'd made in 2 years at Tech Vanguard. "Sir, You've earned it," Dr. Alvarez said firmly. "And frankly, it's an investment. We're not just hiring you for what you've already done. We're hiring you for what you're going to build next." Darius signed the bonus agreement, and Klaus shook his hand with genuine warmth. "We'll see you in Stuttgart, Mr. Cole. And please, start thinking about your team. We'll need good people for the integration program, and I trust your judgment." Darius nodded, but his mind was already elsewhere, back at Tech Vanguard, thinking about the people he was leaving behind. Tim and Sandra and Ed and all the others who'd believed in him when no one else did. He couldn't take them all with him, but maybe he could do something else. He pulled out his phone and sent a message to Jean Holbrook. "Can you meet me tonight? I need your help with something." Jean replied immediately. "Name the place." They met at a diner 3 blocks from Darius's apartment, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since the Reagan administration. Jean was already there when Darius arrived, sitting in a corner booth with 2 cups in front of him. "You look different," Jean said as Darius slid into the seat across from him. "Different how?" "Lighter," Jean said. "Like you just put down a weight you've been carrying for too long." Darius smiled faintly. "Maybe I did." He wrapped his hands around the coffee cup, feeling the heat seep into his palms. "I need you to do something for me." "Name it." "Klaus asked me to start thinking about my team for the European program. He wants recommendations, people I trust." Darius leaned forward. "I want you to put together a list. Everyone at Tech Vanguard who's worth a damn. People who got buried, overlooked, or stuck in positions below their skill level. People like me." Jean's eyebrows went up. "You're talking about poaching." "I'm talking about opportunity," Darius said. "Hoffman Industrial is going to need engineers, technicians, project managers, good people who know how to work. And I'd rather hire people I trust than start from scratch." Jean was quiet for a moment, then he grinned. "You know, Celeste's going to lose her mind when she finds out." "I know," Darius said. "That's not why I'm doing it, but I won't pretend it's not a bonus." Jean laughed, low and genuine. "All right, I'll put the list together. But Darius? Some of those people have families, roots. They're not all going to be able to just pick up and move to Germany." "I know," Darius said, "so we make sure the offer's good enough that they can. Klaus is serious about this. He wants the best, and I'm going to give him that." Jean nodded slowly. "You're building something real, aren't you?" "I'm trying," Darius said quietly. "I'm trying to build something where people like us don't have to fight just to be seen." Jean extended his hand across the table, and Darius shook it. "Then I'm in. All the way." Over the next week, Darius worked with Jean to compile a list of 23 people from Tech Vanguard, engineers who'd been passed over for promotions, technicians who'd been stuck in dead-end roles, project coordinators who'd been managing chaos with no recognition. Gene reached out quietly, feeling out interest, explaining the opportunity without making promises he couldn't keep. And one by one, people started saying yes. By the end of the second week, Darius had sent Klaus a preliminary roster. By the end of the third week, Klaus had approved the hires and extended formal offers. And by the end of the fourth week, 8 people from Tech Vanguard had resigned to join Hoffman Industrial's European integration team. Celeste Harrington's carefully constructed empire was hemorrhaging talent, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. She tried. She called individual meetings, offered counteroffers, made vague promises about promotions and raises, and renewed commitments to innovation. But the people who were leaving weren't leaving for money. They were leaving because they'd watched what happened to Darius Cole, and they knew that no amount of salary would change the fact that Celeste Harrington valued control more than competence. The board of directors noticed. They couldn't not notice. Tech Vanguard's stock continued to slide, and the internal culture had become toxic enough that even the HR complaints were piling up. Anonymous reports about hostile work environments, retaliation against employees who questioned leadership, and a pervasive sense that the company valued optics over ethics. And then, 3 weeks after Darius's resignation, Klaus Hoffman sent a letter to Tech Vanguard's board. It was polite, formal, and devastatingly precise. In it, Klaus outlined his concerns about the company's leadership, specifically citing the public humiliation of Darius Cole, the bureaucratic obstruction that followed, and the subsequent exodus of talent. He noted that while Hoffman Industrial remained committed to the existing AX7 contract, any future partnerships would be contingent on significant leadership and cultural reforms. The letter didn't name Celeste directly. It didn't have to. The board met in emergency session 2 days later. Celeste was not invited. The resolution came down 48 hours after that, delivered by the board's chairperson, a silver-haired woman named Margaret Sato, who'd been with the company since its founding and had no patience for executives who put ego over results. Celeste was called into the boardroom at 9 in the morning and told in no uncertain terms that she was being reassigned. She would no longer serve as CEO. Instead, she would transition to a senior advisory role with significantly reduced authority, overseeing compliance and training programs while the board conducted a national search for new leadership. Her salary would be maintained, but her decision-making power was effectively gone. It was a demotion dressed up in corporate language, and everyone in the room knew it. Celeste sat there, her face pale, her hands trembling just slightly. "This is a mistake." "No, Ms. Harrington," Margaret said quietly. "The mistake was letting your pride damage this company's reputation and future. The mistake was treating one of our most talented employees like a prop in your personal theater. The mistake was thinking control and leadership were the same thing." She leaned forward. "You built something extraordinary here, but you forgot that companies are made of people, not monuments, and people will only tolerate being invisible for so long." Celeste opened her mouth, closed it, and then stood up. She walked out of the boardroom without another word, her heels clicking against the polished floor, her composure finally cracking just enough that people could see the cracks. By the end of the day, the announcement went out. Tech Vanguard's board of directors has appointed an interim CEO while conducting a comprehensive search for permanent leadership. Celeste Harrington will continue to serve the company in an advisory capacity, focusing on compliance, ethics, and employee development. It was clinical, bloodless, and final. And across the Atlantic, in a small office in Stuttgart, Darius Cole read the news on his phone and felt something settle inside him. Not vindication, not satisfaction, just closure. Dr. Alvarez knocked on his open door and he looked up. "You saw?" "I saw," Darius said. "How do you feel?" Darius thought about it for a moment. "I feel like maybe the system worked. Eventually." "It worked because you forced it to," Dr. Alvarez said. "Don't underestimate what you did, Mr. Cole. You didn't just fix an engine. You exposed a fundamental flaw in how that company operates, and sometimes that's more important than any technical innovation." Darius nodded slowly. "I just wish it hadn't taken so long." "Change always does," Dr. Alvarez said, "but it's happening, and you're part of why." She left, and Darius turned back to his computer, where schematics for the next phase of the AX7 program were already waiting. The European rollout was ahead of schedule. The production units were performing flawlessly, and his team, the people he'd brought with him from Tech Vanguard, plus the new hires Klaus had approved, was building something that felt less like a job and more like a mission. 3 months later, the first fully integrated AX7 engines rolled out across Hoffman Industrial's logistics network, powering autonomous freight trucks through Germany, France, and the Netherlands. The performance data was perfect, the reliability ratings were off the charts, and the industry press was calling it a breakthrough. Darius's name was on the patents. His team's work was being studied in engineering programs across Europe, and Klaus Hoffmann had already started talking about expanding the program into Asia and South America. But the moment Darius remembered most clearly wasn't any of that. It was 6 months after he'd left Tech Vanguard when he got a message from Tim Rossfield. Tim had stayed behind, taking over Darius's old role and leading the remnants of the propulsion team. The message was short. "You were right. Things are changing here. New CEO started last week. First thing she did was dismantle Celeste's approval protocols and launch a company-wide review of how we evaluate talent. HR is being rebuilt from scratch. People are actually excited to come to work again. Thought you'd want to know." Darius read the message twice, then sent back a single line. "Glad to hear it. Keep building." And that was enough. 1 year after Darius Cole had walked out of Celeste Harrington's office for the last time, Tech Vanguard was a different company. The new CEO, a woman named Dr. Lena Park, who'd spent 20 years in aerospace engineering before moving into leadership, had made it her mission to rebuild the company's culture from the ground up. She instituted transparent promotion criteria, mandatory leadership training focused on empathy and collaboration, and an anonymous reporting system that actually worked. The AX7 program continued under new leadership, with regular consultations from Darius's team at Hoffman Industrial. The partnership had grown stronger, not weaker, and the two companies were now collaborating on next-generation propulsion systems that promised to redefine the industry. And Celeste Harrington, stripped of her authority but technically still employed, spent her days leading mandatory ethics workshops and reviewing compliance reports, a purgatory of her own making, where every session was a reminder of what she'd lost. She never apologized. She never admitted fault, but she also never forgot the man in coveralls who'd walked into her boardroom and dismantled everything she thought she controlled. Darius, for his part, didn't think about Celeste much anymore. He was too busy building the future, not just for himself, but for everyone who'd ever been told they weren't good enough, smart enough, or valuable enough to matter. He'd proven them all wrong, not by fighting, not by demanding recognition, but by doing the work, staying true to his principles, and refusing to let anyone else define his worth. And in the end, that was the victory that mattered most. 2 years after the day Celeste Harrington had pointed at him and laughed, Darius Cole stood on a stage in Berlin accepting an industry award for innovation in sustainable propulsion systems. His team was in the audience. Tim had flown in from Denver, Sandra from Tech Vanguard's new European office, Jean from a consulting position he'd taken after finally retiring from facilities. Dr. Alvarez stood beside him on stage, smiling with quiet pride. And Klaus Hoffmann, who'd taken a chance on a maintenance worker with a toolbox and a dream, was in the front row applauding. When Darius stepped up to the microphone, the room went quiet. "I'm not going to stand here and tell you I did this alone," he said, his voice steady. "Because I didn't. Every person who believed in me when I was invisible, every engineer who trusted my instincts when they had no reason to, every leader who valued competence over credentials, they're the reason I'm standing here." He paused. "But I'm also standing here because I refuse to let someone else's limitations become my ceiling. And if there's one thing I hope people take from this story, it's that your value isn't determined by who recognizes it. Your value is determined by the work you do and the integrity you bring to it. Everything else is just noise." The applause that followed was long and genuine, and when Darius stepped down from the stage, he felt something he'd never quite felt before. Not vindication, not pride, just peace. He'd done the work. He'd built something real. And he'd proven that sometimes the best revenge isn't fighting back. It's moving forward and building something so undeniable that the people who dismissed you have no choice but to watch you succeed. 3 months later, Jean called with news that made Darius smile for the rest of the day. "You're not going to believe this," Jean said, his voice crackling with laughter. "Celeste's gone. Officially. The board finally bought out her contract and she's done. No advisory role, no nothing. She's out." "What's she going to do?" Darius asked. "Honestly, I don't think anyone cares," Jean said. "But word is she's writing a book about leadership. Can you believe that?" Darius laughed, a real full laugh that felt like releasing something he'd been holding on to for too long. "Good for her. Maybe she'll learn something." "Maybe," Jean said, "but I doubt it." They talked for a while longer, catching up on life and work and all the small victories that added up to something bigger. And when Darius hung up, he looked out the window of his office in Stuttgart, where the city stretched out below him in a patchwork of light and shadow, and thought about how far he'd come, from a maintenance worker fixing outlets to an award-winning engineer leading international teams, from invisible to undeniable, from fighting for recognition to building something that didn't need anyone's permission to exist. It had been a long road, but it had been worth it. And somewhere in Denver, in a building where he'd once been invisible, a new generation of engineers was learning that competence matters more than credentials, that listening is more powerful than talking, and that the person everyone overlooks might just be the one who changes everything. Darius Cole had proven that, not with anger, not with resentment, but with work, integrity, and an unshakable belief that doing the right thing would eventually be enough. And in the end, it was.